Today we're talking about iced tea, not the drink, but the Island Coastal Economic Trust, which has approved $49 million in funding to support economic diversification and regional growth. My guests today on Upfront, Dave Mannix and Phil Kent. Thank you for joining us today. Now, a lot of people don't know what the Island Coastal Economic Trust is about, so I thought it was a great opportunity to bring you here and say, what is the organization and how it's helping the economies right across Vancouver Island as well as up the Sunshine Coast, and we'll talk about the regions later on. But I guess starting off, what is Island Coast Economic Trust?
Well, Island Coast Economic Trust was developed through legislation of the provincial government in 2006. And it was supported by the entire legislature with respect to the trusts. There were three major trusts that are similar to ours in the province: the Southern Interior Trust, the Northern Trust, and the Northern Coastal Development Trust, it was called, which we went with Island Coast Economic Trust as a name. That legislation put some money into each of those trust areas. It was developed as a ground-up organization so that communities in their trust areas were leading and developing the priorities for their communities with respect to how they would improve their economic development outcomes and look at different sectors. There were sectors that were identified in the trust acts, and I believe we had many: forestry, transportation, agriculture, tourism, forestry, I think I said forestry, and there were a couple of others as well. So harbors, that kind of thing. So yeah, there were many, I think there were 8 sectors altogether that we could work in. But it was set up as an arm's length piece from government. So the trusts really developed their own strategies around what would work best in their trust areas.
Specific, as you say, to the regions too, because you know what you need in that area. But when you say that it's set up to help communities, why is it necessary to establish economic trust, financial impetus for these groups? I mean, isn't there banks, there's federal funding, there's whatever. Why do we have to have this other agency that helps the startups?
Well, one of the things that is challenging for a lot of the smaller communities and even some of the bigger ones is the people to be able to do that, to be able to put together a number of funding sources. We are not a sole funder. Most of the others aren't neither. There's a certain level of credibility for our clients as they get to work with our agency and others to develop a better quality product and an assurance around being able to deliver. One of the key things for Coast Funds and along with the other funders is being able to have a clear understanding of the people that are involved at the community level and their capability. Coast Funds right from inception was able to provide mentorship right from the beginning of the concept through so that we could get to yes as often as possible.
I think one of the biggest things we understood very early on in the development of the strategy with this trust was that there were different capacities. We have a number of different sized communities. Nanaimo is part of the trust, but there's also places like Alert Bay and Kelsey Bay and others. So there were different needs, and the way the trust is set up in terms of its governments, there's 2 regional advisory committees, the northern one and one for the southern area of the trust area. And the projects have first come into those organizations, that part of the organization where you have all of the mayors, chairs, MLAs with that area who look at the projects for a first go over and then recommend those to the board. And they may at times recommend going back to the applicant, a particular community or nonprofit organization, to help to create a better proposal, one that ensures that there's some success. So the due diligence around developing the projects is quite significant, but we're always there to help assure that they can do that. And the one other major, I think, portion of what makes this work so well is that funding is always there. It's flexible, it's ready when the communities are ready. And we have a number of different programs today that have changed from the original ones. The first one was an economic infrastructure project investment. And so if you look at some of the first projects that we did, they were some very large pieces that were fundamental economic pieces of the coast economy, investing in the Nanaimo airport, the port in Port Alberni, and things like that that were fundamental to other things taking place. So, and as we've gone on, we've served, I think, well, about 160 projects right across the region, and they all have varying sizes, but their focus was on developing some of the infrastructure, and now we have a program which works on economic development readiness, so they can take the things they've done and create strategies around leveraging the most that they can out of that project.
You said leveraging, and I was going to ask you about that. With what I understand from organizations such that are like the Economic Trust, where you have a certain amount of fund that you can apply, you decide how much. Is it based on that they have to, those groups, communities have to also seek funding from other organizations to get to that? They're not saying 100% is coming from the trust, right?
No, absolutely. We weren't a sole funder, as Mr. Mannix said. I think when we first set up the trust as well, we looked at the different needs of communities. So we have different funding ratios for instance, in an urban area like Nanaimo or Cowichan, or Campbell River, for instance, you might find that the funding ratio is greater. So it might be 3-to-1 funding. In much smaller communities, First Nations, some nonprofits, it would be a 1-to-1 ratio, depending on how industry reliant a community was on single industries. So places up in the North Island that are very dependent on resource industry, such as forestry or fishing in the past, would get a 1-to-1 funding. So there was an allowance for communities to get more funding if they were in more difficulty in terms of their economy and diversity.
Looking at some of the projects, you said 160 plus in 60 communities, and I know the website has a big list and pictures that show things, but just as an example for people in this region, you mentioned the Nanaimo airport, and we know the economic spin-off that comes from that. It's not just the airport, it's everything else that's serviced by that. But some examples in other communities, marinas are a big one, and people might not think that a marina is a big deal, but when you were solely related on fishing, and now there's not so much fishing, tourism is the next spin-off on that. Can you name other examples that people could relate to?
Yeah, harbors were a big thing. For instance, the Port Alberni's harbor, they needed a breakwater. So, we were contributed to quite a large project with some of the infrastructure to assist marinas in developing and being more safe. There's the Ford Cove harbor that's just being completed on Denman Island, Hornby Island.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's just being completed now. So they didn't have the capacity to be able to have the visiting tourism from the boating industry from the coast, and those kind of things. Ladysmith also had kind of a visitor center project for the waterfront in their marina, and it just builds capacity. And of course, we've had the island or the coast. I'm trying to remember the name of them. The yachting.
Kayak or?
Well, no, it's about the coastal boating, so it's like a marine trail, and it created a whole new marketing thing around the fact that those facilities were in place.
How does the trust operate as far as, okay, you're on the board of directors, but you also mentioned that the mayors get together in communities and talk about things and say either go back to the, iron out some more details and come back, and then we'll forward this on to the trust. So who's on the trust, and how does that board of directors established?
Well, the two regional advisory committees are the whole organization. So there's a Northern Regional Advisory Committee, which I think has about 32 members. And the Southern Regional Advisory Committee has about a dozen members. Those, through the legislation, are all the mayors and chairs of the communities in those areas. From that, those regional advisory committee members elect the board of directors.
And our board's made up of 8 elected officials, as Phil had said, and how they nominate through the different, what we call the RAC committees. And then there's 5 provincial appointees. And I happen to be one of those, that generally have a background in business or, in politics and or community. And so we've been very lucky to have that balancing point between what could have been a almost purely politically driven organization and then having some expertise. So it's worked out quite well. I think one of the outcomes that we were quite amazed with in about the first 3 years, when some of the bigger projects like the airport, the port, and all the rest, they were much larger projects. We were given a mandate to look at regional benefit and investment. We thought that was going to be a challenge because each mayor was going to want their piece. And I'm happy to say that that throughout this organization, coming into its 11th year, that all of these political people, almost 50-something of them, I guess, representatives, and other community people like ourselves, and that have been able to work with that in mind. And we've had very few of any real clashes between any group, and that's quite amazing. We expected there was going to be some toing and froing going on, so that's been a major achievement for us. It really has brought some harmony and a sense of community to this whole part of the island and to the Sunshine Coast.
As opposed to saying it's just about me, but to say community is the whole island.
Yeah, I think instead of competing, we're collaborating, and
Yes.
and I think that's one of the great values. Is it's one of the only venues in which all of the leaders of these communities see each other on a regular basis. So we're comparing notes. There's, I guess, friendly competition in the sense that we're striving to do better in each of our communities, and we're borrowing and stealing different ideas and concepts that from other communities, and we're getting the benefit of their time and expertise and things that they've done. So one of the values of the website that we have is that all the projects are listed on there in all the details. So they get all kinds of detail as to how the project was developed, where they got the funding from, what were the successes, and what were the challenges they had along the way.
So others can learn from it.
Absolutely.
This has been, that's been a huge benefit for us, where trail projects, something we weren't really sure that those were going to be real solid investments. Remembering back that this was created to sort of try and help offset the turn in the economy in the forest and fishing sector, and try to help stimulate some other areas of interest, as Phil said, in tourism and all of these other things. As we got through some of the trail projects, and now, 10 years later, tourism has a huge surge. Cape Scott was one of the big projects that we did up there, the North Coast Trail and that, and stuff on the West Coast, Banfield and that, have really paid off now. They're a huge attraction. Mount Cain is another good example.
When you look at there's lots of successes, obviously, and that's what you're boasting and talking about, and tremendous projects that people wouldn't think came from support from a trust, kind of an association. You'd think that maybe it was like Nature's Trust, or it was a Rotary group or somebody who funded those. But there has to be some failures potentially in there as well. Have there things that have gone wrong, that didn't work out, that got funding?
I can't come up with one, to be honest with you. I think most of them, the way that we developed the criteria around doing the proposals was to ensure that people were successful. So we ensured through the due diligence that they would be sustainable in their business plans, that they had their matching money. We gave them time to get that. We would help them in trying to resource their projects. But it really was about the goals of creating economic diversity and also delivering on jobs, which was much of the province's focus over the number of years. And if you look at the statistics, we've done very well on that. I think the investment was leveraged into well over close to $300 million in investment for all the investments. That was the leveraged amount of investment. So, and it had a tremendous impact. So we're talking about 2,600 permanent jobs, which is substantial. Across a region of very rural communities, and about the same amount of construction jobs in the process. So there were some unique projects that we didn't know were going to be successful as they were. I would say one was the Kinsel Trestle in the County Valley. We weren't sure, but
That surprises me. I mean, the Kinsel Trestle is such an iconic part of the Cowichan Valley's history.
Right.
And you saw the trestle projects that happened up in the Okanagan and support they had and the tourism it generated. And I know that was a struggle to get approvals and get that going and preserve it and save it, but it's a beautiful project.
Yep, and the trust was a part of a funder in that one. And in terms of the due diligence with respect to the permanent jobs that we might see from that, because we do have an economist do the economic analysis on these projects and try to predict what the outcome will be. That one was probably one of the lowest I think that we'd ever had in terms of what they were saying. But when you go and speak to the people in Cobble Hill or Shawnigan Lake, the businesses there, it's been huge. You know, they're getting a huge amount of visitors there. The Elk Falls suspension bridge.
Huge.
Now, we did expect that one would do well, but I mean, the numbers are fantastic. I mean, it's bringing in close to $3.1 million into the economy every year, and this is in a very, very short period of time.
That is very impressive.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the economic analysis, and I remember reading something on the website. Do you also do kind of like a regional economic picture to keep gauge on how things are going and where you have to maybe target specific funding projects?
That we do that. There is an economic analysis section on our website which keeps more up-to-date information with respect to looking at how the economy is doing. And that's really a resource for the member communities and economic development offices and others to use that resource if they would like to. In terms of trying to target sector funding, I think that's a little bit counterintuitive in terms of how communities decide what their priorities are. Only the communities can really know what their strengths are. And we help them go through the process of looking at that, and looking at their regional partners around them as to how they can collaborate together to do better. A good example, I think, of that is the tourism initiative in Ukilit, Tofino, and with First Nations, and the way that they collaborated to develop a strategy for delivering better and for each together, rather, as opposed to trying to compete specifically. So when you look at some of the elements, such as Tofino has accessed the fund for some of their revitalization in their town core, created great improvements, improved on an already great product with respect to the businesses there. But if you took Ukilit, other than their harbor, they didn't have a lot there. So the Wild Pacific Coast Trail was a project that we've worked with them in several phases, and that's been a huge smash. I think it's number 5 on TripAdvisor for things to do in BC. Their aquarium, which was a very unique approach to an aquarium. So it creates it creates those things that bring people from a desire from things to do, and maintains and retains people in their area for longer. And I think the collaboration along with First Nations right now, I think that is quite important and I think encouraging that right now 25% of the applications we have in for funding right now are actually First Nations groups that are doing that, and that's fantastic. We've had some very successful First Nation projects.
And I was going to ask about that and say, is there a mandate somewhere that there, or not a mandate, but encouragement to work together in cooperation with many of the First Nations on the island, the coast, to see if there is potential to develop new partnerships,
I wouldn't say there was a specific mandate for that, but they're part of our coast area, and Dave had some very strong experience in the Coast Opportunities Trust, so which was more specific to First Nations groups. But we see them all together, and what we want to do is encourage communities to think about what they can do as good projects together with as many as people as they can include in that.
Now, 11 years, 2006, they were developed, all these different boards, the 3 boards. Was there a target date that they said it's going to continue on for this long, or it was supposed to be a 5-year project, a 10-year project?
Well, I think at the very initial stage in legislature, I think the intent of government was that money would get out into the economy as quickly as possible. That's certainly the way the Island Coastal Economic Trust looked at it, and we also had some fundamental differences between the other trusts, the Coast Interior and the northern part of the province, where their needs were substantially different. And so I think in response, we needed certain core investments in our harbors, in airports, in infrastructure like that, to create the foundation for diversity and economic development. And so that was the approach to the Island Coast Economic Trust. So we originally, I believe, Dave, you were there.
Yes.
We had an initial strategic session up at Mount Washington with basically every community.
All the RAC committees.
Everybody.
It was very clear in the early days. There were different models have been applied. It was very clear coming from the RAC committee and the community leaders, politically and otherwise, that this would be a spend down fund. It was not going to be set up to be a trust that was to run in perpetuity and spin off a couple $100,000 or $800,000 a year. If there was opportunities there that were real, they were regional, they met the test, they wanted that type of investment. That was our belief in the message that we were hearing from the provincial government at that time, that we weren't to just sit on the money and then, just spend the interest per annum. So that was our marching orders, and that is exactly how we structured it, and that's pretty much how we've delivered it, I believe, Phil.
And that's where you're at. We've only got a few minutes left, so I want to cover the most important things that you would like to get out. Is there opportunity still for community groups or others to apply, or is there a deadline that's passed?
Absolutely. On the economic infrastructure programs, the application time is open anytime. On the economic development readiness program, there are certain calls through the year. I believe it's 3 calls. So, and those are fully subscribed right now. We've got a lot of applications. We did get a commitment prior to the election to top the fund up because I think we were able to make the case with the government that we were doing good work and that work needed to continue. And there's still more to be done, I think, and so we're looking forward to that. And we will, we have made adjustments in the way we go. When we first started, we were investing in up to $5 million in projects. After a few of those happened, there weren't those large projects coming in, and we found that the average application was more in the neighborhood of 250 to 400,000. So our limit was lower to the 400,000 matching, and so we have a lot more, I think, vigorous small applications that are having incremental effect in the regions that they're being built in. So, and it's, as I said, it's flexible, it's responsive, unlike what Dave was saying earlier, that the other programs for funding, often grant programs, are very short deadlines. There's a huge amount of applicants and never enough money to fund even a reasonable portion of them. And so it's kind of like a lottery. The ICET is not like a lottery. You come with a concept, you come with a good project and a good plan. We work with you to make that plan better if it's necessary. We've had some, actually right out of the gate, projects have come to us and we just say, they figured it out. It's exactly what they need to do. Others where, because of capacity and other reasons, they need more assistance, and we continue to work with them until, as Dave said, we get to yes.
Yeah, they're not just basically handed the money and abandoned. You work with them, want them to be successful, and want the communities to be successful, obviously.
Absolutely.
All right. So people wanting information about that, you have the website is the Island Coastal Economic Trust. You can just Google that. Lots of information. Everything's on there. The bios for all the people for the board directors, and you'll continue on for at least another couple of years, I take it?
I hope so.
We
The timing was good with the downturn in the global economy out of 2008, and Vancouver Island and our service area has seen a resurgence in the economy in a number of areas, so we'll still be there with them.
All right.
In province for economic growth or job growth for full-time jobs, the Island Coast Economic Area led the province in that percentage. So.
Very successful program. Thank you very much, both Phil Kent and Dave Mannix, for coming in and talking about Island Coastal Economic Trust and how they're helping develop sustainable economies in the regions of the island and up the coast. Thank you for joining us today on Upfront.